Call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda.
Second.
Moved and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes. Next is the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I move we approve the consent agenda. I almost screwed that up. There's nothing on it.
Second.
Moved and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes. No public comments tonight. So new business is appoint city clerk. It is recommended to me from the committee to appoint Amara city clerk. So I concur with that recommendation and council to appoint Amara city clerk. To approve the appointment of Amara city clerk.
Any discussion around candidates and number? And we had multiple candidates, right?
We interviewed 3 candidates.
Further discussion? Not, I will entertain a motion.
I move we appoint Amber Packard as city clerk.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes. Next, council committee reports, budget and finance. Scott.
Yeah, we had a meeting, I can't remember what the date was, 29th, I think, something like that. We discussed a couple of programs, the Rural Housing Incentive Program. And due to Senate Bill 90's changes were made, we're now in the realm. It used to be no counties above 100,000 could utilize the program. Now they've changed it to cities less than 60 could potentially utilize it. So there's an opportunity there to look at that. Also discussed the neighborhood revitalization program, discussing extending it. I think both those programs are exclusive. You can't do both. It's one or the other. So there's obviously trade-offs in a lot of things we need to look at. So I think we talked in the committee about having the mayor appoint an advisory committee to look at these programs and talk about cost benefit of them, how they would relate to, say, rooftop growth that we might want to see. So I think that was something you're going to do here in the future to do that. So look at both those programs, continue one and or move over to the other, or neither is an option. 2022 budget process is always on the agenda for these committee meetings this time of year. We saw a lot of the output on the work session. Just to reiterate, in case some watching weren't there, Senate Bill 13 is driving a new process, as we heard. It has to do with revenue neutral funding year over year for a portion of our budget, right? So it's not the entire budget. It's just the portion that the property tax funds in the general fund. So it's about, I think, 1.6 million. 15% or less of our overall budget would be the revenue neutral decision that needs to be made. Do we stay where we were last year and build a budget around that, or do we accept any appreciated property tax value, keeping our mill levy flat as was last year? So I think this June 15th, the county clerk will notify us of what that revenue neutral amount was. I think we have until July 15th to decide whether we want to exceed revenue neutral. So that's really the first critical date in the budget process to decide whether we want to take that number, plug it into the budget and use it, or exceed that, and if so, by how much. So that'll be the first decision that we'll need to make. I think we talked about initial plan being in front of the council, initial budget proposal in front of the council on this month's work session to talk about that. I think the plan is to come in and look at a revenue neutral budget as part of that initial planning process. So that's when we would see the impact of that with estimated numbers of what we think they'll be. What else we talk about? I think part of the discussion we had around the revenue neutral 2022 budget is it's complicated. It's a complicated process relative to the way we used to do this in the past. There just isn't enough time between now and then to really educate the citizens about what this means and how it is or isn't different than the way we've operated in the past. So the discussion was around, and obviously it'll be a council discussion, do we want to stay revenue neutral or close to it to give us a year to educate the public on what this means, and then when we come back next year, better understanding. People come to the hearing that's going to be driven by this with a better understanding of what we're doing and what we're asking for. So that was talked about in the committee as well. And then the last piece is the American Rescue Plan funding. I think the number would be, what do you say, about 675K approximately is what we're targeted to get over 2 tranches? Or is it all initial?
No, we're getting in 2. We're getting in 2.
So yeah, so we're getting two tranches. The first one should be landing here by June, July.
Should be June, yeah.
So there'll be an opportunity to obviously talk about how that fits into budget planning, strategic planning. Don't have to use these funds until the end of 2024, I believe.
That's correct.
So not a rush to do it, but if we need it, it's there. So it's a great safety net to have. We'll obviously talk about that, timing when that hits, et cetera. Just the last thing we talked about was the library funding, some alternatives. And I think there's going to be a Zoom call this week with Lansing about how they are actually incorporated the library staff into the city and see if that's maybe an alternative to funding there. So that was also discussed.
We had that meeting this morning.
We did. Any feedback on that?
Really, they've always been under the city. They didn't have a library until early 2000 or whatever it was. So they did not have to transition. They formed a library, and it's always been a department underneath the city. So that's the way. So it's a little different than what we're dealing with here, but they have been, and they don't really have any. I mean, they're just another department, as they say, and they have about, I think, 3 mills dedicated to their library. But a mill there is 2.5 times what ours is. So you're talking Lansing, so that's a much bigger city than we are. But their library director, department head, reports directly to the city manager, which is kind of what we were talking about if we went to that. I think they had 3 full-time people working for the library. And of course, they're city employees that get full benefits and whatever. So similar, not quite the same as what we're doing. So they never did transition. Right. They didn't have anything different. They never known anything different than that. So we did learn a little, but nothing really, shocking or anything that would point you one way or the other.
And Wendy was part of that, or the?
Yes, it was her, one of her library board members, myself, and I think 3 folks from Lansing, including their city manager, library director. I think their budget director was also in there. So we spent about an hour with them.
Okay, so there's an option. I would assume they're going to come back with their recommendation about one versus the other.
I believe so. Yeah.
That's all I had. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, we met on the 26th. We will meet again on May 24th at the 26th meeting. We talked about the Rural Housing Incentive Development Program and sort of how the guidance from the Budget Committee, as well as the guidance from the Strategic Planning session. We talked about a task force being developed on the CDC level to kind of see about how to go about attracting more developers for sort of the demand that we have for developers. We're kind of short. So just kind of talks through some of that. And the next steps are going to be trying to get that task force together. The mayor was going to start looking into doing that with some citizens, etc. That's it. Yeah, like I said, May 24th.
Public safety, Susan.
We have not met since the last council meeting. The next meeting is May 12th at 4 o'clock.
Public works and utilities, Julie.
We have not met since the last meeting either, and our next meeting is May 13th.
Legislative committee, Darren.
We have not met, and we need to meet. We talked about the last council meeting, providing some sort of ordinancing for Sullivan Square to get it in line with some of our other green spaces that allow BYOB. At least that would be a start, and then can build from there if we want to. So Scott, are you available on Monday the 10th at 8? Is that in the way of any sort of department meeting or anything like that?
Yeah, Mondays are bad.
Monday, how about Wednesday the 12th?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Better.
So Wednesday the 12th at 8 o'clock.
Got it.
And then we'll decide from there, setting a schedule for further meetings, because I know we kind of shut it down for a while. We weren't quite sure, and I know you guys need to know. So Wednesday, the 12th, 8 o'clock at City Hall, and we'll talk about Sullivan Square.
City Administrator comments?
Nothing further.
Any staff? Any further council comments? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion we adjourn.
Second.
Moved in second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed nay. Motion passes. We're adjourned.